New year, same issues on the desks of European politicians. But what are the 5 big stories that could shape 2026? That's the question we're posing on this episode of Brussels My Love, the podcast, with me, Maeve McMahon. And of course, this is our very first edition of 2026. Happy New Year. Stay with us though, as we break down the big topics that will drive Brussels and the EU this year. First, industry is king. The European People's Party won the European elections back in June 2024. They're clearly setting the agenda now in Brussels. The green social agenda of the previous mandate seems to be slightly gone. The focus now is on staying competitive, cutting red tape and easing bureaucracy. In 2025 last year, we saw numerous examples of legislation being scaled back. NGOs are livid. We saw as well the European Parliament voting to delay and weaken the EU deforestation regulation, a 2023 law that ensures that products sold in the EU don't cause the destruction of forests or the violation of human rights. For her view, I asked Euronews EU editor Maria Tadeo if she thought this simplification momentum would continue into 2026.
Yes, since the EPP won the election, since the Draghi report came out, which in many ways did say climate policies and the Green Deal that is needed in Europe, but you also need big industrial policy to match it. One of the points that Mario Draghi made that to me remained very substantial is the fact that he argues there's this big gap between the climate ambition, but the lack of an equally ambitious industrial policy to sort of create a level playing field. And for me, if I look at 2026, this trend will continue. Of course, we have to pick back up from where we left it, and that is the fact that the Commission decided last minute, 11th hour in December to scrap the ban on the combustion engine cars. And that to me, of course, they went from a full ban to now it's going to be just 90, and there's all of these things that they will attach. And the commissioner who we spoke to on Euronews kept repeating this is climate neutral, but that to me was a very symbolic vote. And it was a vote where really it encapsulated this idea of, will the industry win it and get the upper hand, or does climate still sort of take the leading role? If we had had this conversation 4 years ago, it was clear this would not have happened. Now it's completely different, and to me, it really is the industry that now has the ear of the Commission, that the Commission also wants to talk to, wants to engage with. And I've always been very struck in the past few weeks, and in the next year, I expect this to continue, this language from the Commission that says, yes, we care about climate change. Yes, we're not undoing the Green Deal, but it cannot be at the expense of competitiveness and the economy. We always need to find the best, smartest solution. And this combustion engine, for me, was very symbolic of that. It was sort of this very emotional debate at times of whether the industry would really pressure and win and lobby, and we know they have been doing this, especially the auto sector. The question for me was, would this be a sort of saving grace for the auto sector or the kiss of death for the Green Deal? I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, but overall, it certainly is the industry that has the upper hand, and that would certainly continue in 2026.
And what about Mercosur? I mean, will that get done this year, do you think, in 2026?
Oh, God. It's, of course, we have to go back a few weeks ago when we were at the summit, and obviously we did our show, and we did our big special there, and we talked about how the stakes were so high because Germany, and again, the two stories are very connected. The Germans not only lobbied hard to get this ban on the combustion engine and the petrol and diesel cars from 2035, I should say, but also they lobbied so hard for the Mercosur. They are aware that the world is changing, that tariffs are so high, that President Trump has tripled duties in the world. They also understand that China is now becoming very assertive, very competitive, and I think there's something that's a game changer about China. We used to say this was a copy and paste economy, and that is no longer the case. They are getting very good at innovation, and they are getting very good at top tier technology. Their products are not just a cheap knockoff. The products are actually becoming good. And that's a big problem for Made in Europe, because a lot of this obviously depends on what we think of as a premium of Made in Europe. These are well-made things. So the Mercosur, will it get done? The Germans would say we absolutely need it. The Spanish will say we absolutely need it for the reasons we listed. The Commission is desperate to finally seal the deal. But we've seen that there's a lot of baggage and political toxicity around this. And now it all fully depends on Giorgia Meloni, who, funnily enough, has to make an equal or a similar balancing act, because she needs to decide, do I want to please my industry, who we know really likes the industry, and the sort of Mercosur and opening up new markets, and Italy would really benefit from an economic perspective? Or what about her popular base? And that's where she came from originally when she started her career, who say, but this is bad, it's bad for the farmers and we don't like it, and the European Union is mean. So will it get done? The last we heard is, yes, it must. It did not get signed on the 20th of December as we expected, but we were told it has to happen before the end of January also because there's a risk that it may collapse altogether. Or the South American countries would say, okay, now you want to sign it, but I don't. So these are very muddy waters.
Defence, the second topic that will drive the day in 2026 with the ongoing war in Ukraine and the realisation that the US will no longer step in to support Europe. This topic will be dominating a lot of the policy and political discussions. For more, I had a chat with Alice Tidey, our defence reporter. Take a listen.
Well, I think one of the big topics will be SAFE. So SAFE, as you know, is the 150 billion defence loan scheme that the Commission has put together for member states. And about 19 of them have applied. And in fact, actually, the whole thing was oversubscribed, which means that the member states participating actually asked for more money than was on the table. So the participating member states have submitted their national plans. They did that. The deadline was the 30th of November. So now the Commission is evaluating them. And the plan is for the Commission to give its verdict early in the year and to then start dispersing some of that money ASAP so that the member states can start buying. So quick reminder, there are a few criteria for SAFE. One of them is that several member states must acquire together, so joint procurement. Another one is that they must buy primarily European. That's to kickstart the European industry. And the last one is that they must focus on priority capabilities. So these include air defense, ammunition, drone and counter-drone technology, so-called strategic enablers, and military mobility, among others. So one thing driving the beginning of the year will be these so-called capability coalitions. So how member states organize themselves to address these gaps. And some of them will become lead nations in some of these specific groupings. And then I think another big debate on the defense side will be the common flagship projects that are meant to be prioritized for funding. So the Commission has proposed 4 flagship projects in its Defence Readiness 2030 roadmap, and these include an Eastern Flank Watch and a drone wall that has been rebranded the European Drone Initiative. But these are not actually fixed in stones. Member states have still to decide whether these flagship projects address their capability gaps, whether these are the ones they want to go for, and whether they want to amend them in some shape or form. So I guess that will be a lot of the conversation at the beginning of the year. And then I think lastly, the last big topic for defense in the European Union this year will be governance, because as you know, Maeve, defense is a national competence, and member states have said they want a greater role for defense ministers on how they coordinate their joint effort, as well as a greater role for the European Defence Agency. But all of this is still a bit nebulous and still needs to be worked out. So loads of discussions to be had on this as well.
And you'll be keeping a very close eye on Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, no?
Of course, yes, absolutely. So he's the one sort of spearheading everything. I expect also a bit more focus on space this year and how space can help member states with their defense. So, like when I mentioned strategic enablers, some of that includes space assets.
Well, speaking of space, actually, the 18th European Space Conference will be taking place on the 27th of January right here in Brussels. So we can keep an eye as well on that for Euronews. Alice Tidey, thank you so much for that.
You're most welcome. Bye-bye.
And of course, another major story that will dominate 2026 is the fact that the EU Migration Pact that we've been reporting on for years here at Euronews will officially come into force this summer. For more on that story, I had the chance to speak to Eleonora Vasquez, our reporter who focuses on this topic. So Eleonora, what do you think is coming our way in this year when it comes to migration?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year to you, Maeve, and to everybody listening to us. I would would say three things. For sure, it's the implementation of the pact. It means that every member state has to align with the new rules by June 2026, which means mainly procedures at the borders, digitalization. It's a lot of red tape. And it's
red
a
tape?
lot of...
But
yes,
don't they want to get rid of red tape?
Well, I mean... when you have to adapt to new legislation, you have to get a lot of new stuff at national level. This is what I was told by different people in member states. So you need new stuff, you need new rules, and you need to learn how to apply new rules at the border. And it's a lot of administrative new rules about how basically to collect fingerprints, how to create a database on to collect data of people arriving. And for example, there is this new entry-exit system that will be implemented, and is member states are already trying it, in which, for example, if you are a non-EU citizen that is entering the EU and you have a visa-free 90 days allowance, you will be registered and tracked if you don't leave the Schengen border before, for example, the 90 days. This is similar to what we have in the US with the ESTA that we didn't have before in the EU. So this is one of the thing. The second thing is the return legislation. So we have a new regulation that member states want to prioritize to increase the returns of migrants when a decision on asylum is negative. So basically they apply for asylum, they say, no, we don't give you asylum, so you have to be repatriated. Because at the moment in the EU, only 20% of the decisions are eventually implemented. So it makes sense that member states want to higher a little bit the number, but at the same time, there are also some dark partners, I would say, in this return regulation. For example, to speed up returns, they understand that it's a very hard topic, but there is also a way that member states are not really looking at and monitoring the human rights of these people, returning them, and there is an effort to bypass the international law.
And that's why NGOs are calling this new stance, if you like, on migration, like creating Fortress Europe.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a long way from 2015 until now that the EU is trying to close the border more and more. And there are different reasons for that. First of all, because electorally speaking, migration has become an issue that can easily move votes from one party to another. I'm not talking only about right wing and far rights. I think this is something that is entailing all of political spectrum. So migration is very polarized. And at the moment, everybody are trying to have this rhetoric of closing the border. But at the same time, we didn't. Maybe we will understand the historians of the future will talk about how basically we are disregarding asylum, procedure and protection, because these rules were established after the Second World War when people need protection, need help, refugees. We have a different idea of the world. So of course this reflects a different world we are going to.
Okay, Eleonora Vasquez, thank you so much. So we'll keep an eye on that date, June this summer, when that actual pact is meant to start being implemented, right?
Thank you so much.
Euronews.
And another big story, of course, Eleonora, of 2026 is the elections that are taking place in Hungary. April 2026, they're scheduled for. This election matters, I think, for those of us watching the European Union, because, of course, Budapest can highly influence EU decision-making in areas like foreign policy and also rule of law enforcement. Are you watching these elections closely?
Well, absolutely, Maeve. I think the whole world is watching this election because we'll have a great impact on us Europeans, but also on the geopolitical dynamics and, of course, on Russian influence in Europe, because we know that Orban is very close to Russia. But at the same time, what I think would be interesting to see, we were talking about migration before. Hungary is the country that is the toughest, maybe on migration. Even the Commission that is really going the direction of a fortress Europe is basically saying that Orban is doing too much. So that's very interesting on how it will be unfold during the election, of course.
Well, indeed, I had a chat with Maria today about that topic as well. We can take a listen to her take on the Hungarian elections.
Well, for us, this huge election that could be a game changer because Viktor Orban, at this point, he has become And I don't want to say that he's just an agent of chaos, because I do think that he's an extremely smart politician. I do think that he knows the system inside out. In the final summit of the year, which again, going back to the specials that we did on Euronews, he did come up with a solution. He said the reparation loan would not happen for Ukraine, and that did not happen. He said, if you guys want to continue to pay for this war, issue more debt, get more indebted to help Ukraine, go ahead and do it. I think it's a terrible idea, but I'm not paying a cent. And that's exactly what happened. So this is a politician who really, really knows how to work the machine, but has obviously created now a situation of extreme, it's almost extreme complexity and even tension within the institutions, because it's this continuous veto in an environment that needs a 27 to agree. It's this continuous line that makes him sort of go rogue and be very different to the others. His relationship with Russia, obviously, it's not just the politics, but the energy relationship has become a big point of tension with the rest of the European Union, because he is the odd one out, and a lot of his policies completely clash with what the majority wants to do in the EU. So this is, to me, the biggest one for Europe. It could be a complete game changer for Brussels, certainly. I know many diplomats have told me, oh my God, I cannot wait for Viktor Orban to lose the election and have Peter Magyar, just because we think it's going to be easier to deal with. But never, never underestimate Viktor Orban, because he knows what he's doing. He's a very experienced politician. He's able to capture the pulse of a conservative audience that exists. And I would not just say they exist, but it's growing in Europe. So the trend is in his favor. So, will depend, in my view, on the economy, whether he's actually managed to save some money to then do some tax cuts or give some money out. It will depend on whether he continues to put this narrative of Hungary first and Europe is mean. But if he does not stay in office, that's a massive change. If he stays, that's also going to be extremely complicated because of all these institutional tensions now around the unanimity and the qualified majority. And can you really be a European Union and a union with Orban sitting around the table?
Euronews.
Well, another big story to watch in 2026, AI Act implementation. For more on this, we can bring in now Andrea Renda, an AI expert from the think tank CEPS. Andrea, great to have you with us.
Hello, Maeve. Great to be here.
Look, we're hearing that companies might be given a little bit more time now to implement new rules on high-risk AI, following, of course, lots of calls for more flexibility in the regulations. What do you predict for 2026 in this?
Well, this is what the European Commission has proposed in its recent digital omnibus. Now, it's a little bit tricky because this is what the Commission wants to do. I think they are also right, because companies wouldn't know in many respects what to comply with, as the standards that would define what does it mean to perform a conformity assessment are not ready yet. Sense and Elec, the European standardization body, is still working on the standards. But it's also a little bit of a problem, right? Because the standards are being developed jointly by member states, but with the private sector. So the private sector knows that until the standards are ready, it's impossible to apply the AI Act. So they might have an incentive to slow down the standardization. So who's going to win? It's a little bit of a chicken and egg type of story. I think most likely what's going to happen is that the European Commission will set a precise deadline in 2027 for the beginning of the implementation and the enforcement of the rules of the AI Act that deal with high-risk AI applications, but also clarifying that if the standards in Sense and Elec aren't ready, they will apply some form of temporary provisional standards. What these temporary provisional standards would be is not clear. Perhaps this will be done through a sort of a co-regulatory or self-regulatory mechanism, a little bit like we have seen recently for the code of practice on general purpose AI systems. So very complicated also, because what might happen is that the digital omnibus is not approved by the three co-legislators, so European Commission, Parliament and Council, in time for the postponement of the enforcement of the AI Act to kick in. So that if it's not approved by August next year, then in August, the original plan is that the AI Act starts applying to high-risk AI systems. So we might end up in a huge limbo, which would definitely not project the good image of the EU as a world-class regulator around the world.
That's the problem, isn't it? The credibility here of the EU at stake. What else are you looking out for, Andrea, in 2026 in this field?
Well, the most important thing that we will see in 2026 in this field is, in my opinion, the Apply AI strategy. The European Commission will seek to actually deepen, and I'm using also verbatim Draghi words here, deepen the uptake of artificial intelligence solutions in industry domains, in industrial verticals. So the Apply AI strategy identifies 10 sectors, and actually one of them is public services, thus government, but the other 9 are from health to energy to mobility, automotive, manufacturing, things like this. So we are talking about really deepening the adoption and diffusion of AI so that the EU can achieve better competitiveness, but also potentially rely on own solutions. And here's also the debate on technological sovereignty and how much of the future of AI in Europe should be made in Europe or relying on solutions that come from somewhere else, something that politicians and policymakers and commentators have sometime highlighted as the risk that the EU remains or becomes a colony, a digital colony.
And this will be a big topic as well for the World Economic Forum taking place in a few weeks in Davos on the 19th of January. Andrea Renda, thank you so much for that. We hope to see you lots this year. Take care and all the best.
Thank you, Maeve. All the best.
Euronews.
So just 5 stories you heard there that we'll be watching on Euronews very carefully this year. For more on any of them, do keep an eye on euronews.com. But for now, thank you to our sound engineers, Mark Lacroix, Georges Levaditis and Alicia Carnivali, who's our podcast producer. And if you're not already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or Euronews' YouTube channel. And if you like Brussels My Love, the podcast, please write us a review and, of course, spread the word about Brussels My Love, the podcast. See you next week.
Euronews.